Good morning, Commissioners, Chief Grimala, Mr. Teefank, Madam Secretary, Mr. Inspector General, Mr. City Attorney, members of the public. Today is Tuesday, March 15th, 2022. It's 9:30 a.m. This is a special meeting of the Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning, Commissioner Briggs,
Present.
Commissioner Decker,
Present.
Commissioner Bonner,
Here.
Commissioner Kalanche,
Here.
and Commissioner Sobroff.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Also present, we have the Executive Director, the Inspector General, the City Attorney, and sitting in for the Chief, we have Assistant Chief Grimala. Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We welcome everyone attending this morning. All public comment will be heard during item 2 on the agenda. We will dedicate a total of 45 minutes to public comment. Members of the public will have 1 minute per agenda item for a maximum of 2 minutes total. At the request of the speaker will be given 1 additional minute for general public comment for a maximum of 3 minutes total. Members of the public who participate in public comment are reminded that they can speak to any item on the agenda or a matter within the jurisdiction of the Board of Police Commissioners. Public comment is your opportunity to address the board. So you are free to express your opinion on matters before the board and to generally express when you disagree with other opinions expressed. However, directing your comments to other individuals who have spoken or attacking others who have expressed their opinions shall be deemed off topic and your public comment period will be concluded. Members of the public, if you choose to participate in public comment portion of the agenda, you can participate in this meeting in one of a number of ways that are outlined on the agenda. At this time, before I turn it over to Chief Grimala for the report, I'd like to say a couple of words in recognition and acknowledgement of Women's Recognition Month. I want to pay homage to a true trailblazer in the Los Angeles Police Department, Beatrice Grimala. Assistant Chief Grimala is the head of the Office of Operations, and she oversees the entire patrol division of the LAPD. No other woman has held that position. And in my humble opinion, she has brought needed enhanced training programs to all uniformed patrol officers, and she has managed that department like no other before her. Chief Grimala is widely respected, and she has dedicated the last 37 years to the department and this city. I bring this to everyone's attention today because Chief Grimala will be retiring at the end of this month. Chief Grimala, on behalf of the commission, I salute you for a job well done. I salute you for a life well lived. I salute you for your dedication to the department and this city. And I salute you for all the obstacles that you have overcome, which establishes a roadmap for other women in the department. Thank you for your service.
And I move that we reject her. Retirement.
I would second that motion, but I don't think it carries weight, Commissioner Sobroff. Commissioner Decker, I understand that you wanted to say a few words.
Thank you, Commissioner Briggs. Just briefly, Chief Grimala, I join in all the comments made by Commissioner Briggs about your illustrious career and wish you well in the next chapter of your career, which I know is not over. But during this Women's History Month in particular, I want to thank you for being a pioneer for women in the law enforcement community. You are the first woman to serve as Chief of Operations. That is a milestone for this department. You broke glass ceilings. That was not easy to achieve. You worked in operations throughout your career. You have held each of the assistant chief positions, again, which is a unique perspective, unique achievement in this department. And throughout all of that, you have garnered the respect of all who worked with you and for you. Your area of responsibility has been enormous. You monitor the entire city, making judgment calls throughout each and every day. And as to when you should go out into the field and join and take personal responsibility for what is happening, you exercise that judgment carefully and appropriately. And I was always confident You would always address each issue with skill and professionalism. And being the first woman to achieve all these milestones required tremendous strength. It was not easy, particularly when 80% of your colleagues are male. But fortunately for the city of Los Angeles, you had the strength, the endurance, and the tenacity to succeed. I should also note, Chief, and I know you take special pride in having been the LGBTQ plus coordinator liaison for many years. It was a labor of love throughout. I know you were honored to hold that position regardless of how high in the organization your rank became. You continued to work in that area, and it symbolized your dedication to service and to a community in need of a strong voice in law enforcement. I've known you for well over a decade now, I believe since you were a captain, but I've always stood in admiration of you and your work, your tremendous dedication to community and to the city of Los Angeles. So during this Women's History Month, I'm privileged to have known you. I thank you, Chief, most sincerely for your service, and I certainly wish you well. Thank you, Chief, for your service.
Thank you, Chief. At this time, Chief, I'd like to turn it over to you for your report and your final report before this commission.
Thank you, President Briggs. Thank you, Vice President Decker, to all the commissioners, to Mr. Teefank, our Executive Director of the Police Commission, who has guided me throughout my years of service, to the Office of the Inspector General's lead, Mr. Mark Smith, and your entire staff. I thank you for the relationship that you had honed so well and with such diligence, strength, and compassion throughout the years. And also to Carlos de la Guerra for your guidance and keeping us out of harm's way throughout. And again, to the people of the city of Los Angeles, I thank you for the trust you placed in me. And very, very importantly in my heart, to the troops, the men and women who are out there each and every day on patrol. You gave me the strength to carry on a day in and day out, and I couldn't be more proud of you. I thank you. At this time, I'd like to proceed with the Chief's report, starting with a brief update on COVID. I'm glad to report to the Commission that we continue to meet our deployment needs throughout the organization, even as we are winding down from the height of the pandemic, but clearly still concerned of the impacts that continue as well. Within this past week, we still had 5 additional employees who tested positive for COVID. And sadly to report, we still have 1 employee, a supervisor of this department, who is still hospitalized. He was first hospitalized in August of 2021, August 25th, and he is still suffering with the effects of COVID. Please keep him and his family in your continued thoughts and prayers as he struggles through this recovery period. Looking at exemptions filed, again, we still are at the total of 2,337, and that includes medical and religious. As we look at overall vaccinations for all employees of the department, that's 10,259. We stand at 83.7%. Partially vaccinated, 0.3%, and not vaccinated, 16.0%. As we look at who is still at home suffering the effects of COVID, we actually have 23 additional folks returned to the workplace. Per week prior, 74 were at home, and now we stand at 51. Lastly, I'd like to talk about some of the discipline with regard to COVID vaccination compliance. We currently have 1 civilian employee assigned home pending some disciplinary action potentially. And as we look at our sworn employees, 3 have been terminated at a board of rights, 2 have retired, and 8 are currently assigned home pending a board of rights. I want to thank Deputy Chief Mike Rimkunis and his team for keeping us updated on those numbers and the processes associated with that disciplinary process. At this time now, I'd like to move on to significant incidents and activities taking us from March 8th through March 15th, 2022. Last Friday, we had a recruit graduation of 54, and we wish all of those members of that class well as they move out to field assignments throughout the city. Our next graduating class will be April the 8th with 55 individuals. Hopefully all of them will be there on the field, 45 of those being males and 10 being females. As I move on with significant incidents and activities, we have had no officer-involved shootings or categorical uses of force incidents this past week. So we still stand at 4 officer-involved shootings year to date, which is the same as in 2021, and 1 in custody death in 2022 versus 0 in 2021. Just to keep on everyone's radar, especially members of the public who need to navigate and get from point A to point B on the weekends, we have 2 upcoming incidents that will affect traffic and the movement of pedestrians and vehicles within the city of Los Angeles. And March 20th is the Los Angeles Marathon. We wish all of those participants well in that journey. And then the following Sunday, we will be looking at the Academy Awards, and that's March 27th. So I'm currently reviewing all of the event action plans to ensure public safety and great events that really celebrate the spirit of Los Angeles. Moving on now to crime statistics through March 12th, 2022. To preface my discussion, we have continued challenges with specific regard to robberies citywide, and robberies are driving our Part 1 crime increase numbers. But first, let me provide an update on homicides and victims shot year to date. And once again, my caveat is, as we mention numbers, I never want those numbers to serve to desensitize the lives senselessly lost and the families who have been impacted and will continue to be impacted by these losses or severe injuries. Homicides year to date in 2022, 68, as compared year to date to 2021 of 77. That puts us at a reduction of 11.7%. Victims shot year to date, 273 in 2022 versus 293 in 2021. That is a decrease of 6.8%. But I think as everyone who has been tuning into the commission meetings has seen, that margin of decrease is lessening as we move now through the first quarter of 2022. So we're keeping our eyes very closely affixed to that. As it relates to property crime, we are seeing a 5.1% increase citywide. And those numbers are again being driven, as they have been in weeks prior, by auto-related property crime, theft, burglary from motor vehicles. So we again encourage members of the public to secure and keep valuables out of sight. If somebody's walking past, not to make it target rich so that people can't look through windows and see the opportunity for cell phone chargers, change, computers, etc. As we look at overall Part 1 crime, we are up 5.2% year to date. And for members of the public who may hear us constantly referring week after week to Part 1 crimes, I just want to refresh everyone what is actually contained under that umbrella of Part 1 crime. And that's robbery, aggravated assault, thefts, burglary, motor vehicle theft, rape, and burglary theft from vehicles. So that is the entire gamut of that group of crimes. I also want to just bring up briefly here our continued attention to crimes involving domestic violence, particularly intimate partner, aggravated and simple assaults. Pardon me. And my continued appreciation and the department's continued appreciation to the many advocacy groups that continue to educate and also support the department as team members to prevent recurrence of domestic violence. Pardon me. So intimate partner aggravated assaults are down 1.3%, and intimate partner simple assaults are down 2.8% year to date. But again, that's a very small margin, so we continue to keep our eyes on that. Now I'd like to just spend a few minutes focusing on robberies and looking at the numbers, looking at the types of robberies, trends and patterns, and what the department is doing and committed to doing as we move forward through 2022. So currently we're at 1,810 robberies in the city of Los Angeles versus 1,539 last year at this time. So that's an increase of 17.6% or 271 crimes. And the entire city is being challenged by robberies. Particularly year-to-date, Operations Valley Bureau has seen the largest increase in robberies at 26.4%. And Operations South Bureau accounts for 29.3% of the city's robberies. So these are just some points that I want to emphasize, that everywhere from the Valley to South Bureau, we are seeing the effects of the increase in robberies. Three of the most prominently challenged geographic areas are 77th, Newton, and West Valley. When we look about trends and patterns as we navigate the city, street robberies still top the list in increases at 16.5%. Parking lots also at 24.3%. And we're seeing the burgeoning, and I emphasize that burgeoning trend and pattern of robberies involving mini marts and liquor stores throughout the city of Los Angeles. But very troubling citywide is what I want to emphasize now in a deeper dive: robberies involving a firearm. So year to date, citywide robberies with a firearm are up 44.3%. That is an increase in 204 crimes from this time last year. Citywide robberies with a firearm year to date are increased by, they make up 36.7% of the total number of robberies, of that 1,810. Property taken in these robberies, primarily money, cell phones, and jewelry. So what I'd like right now is to look at 8 specific bullet points of what the department is doing to focus their attention on not only dealing with the robbery picture, but being proactive as well. Firstly, the continuing encouragement through our social media and our community platforms to have the expeditious reporting of any robberies by members of the public. And we have seen that. Any lag time in reporting, I understand the stress of the situation, but lag time decreases our opportunity to get ahead of that investigative piece, for us to put out information, to put out descriptors, and to make the community more broadly aware of that robbery incident. Secondly, we are proactively deploying specialized units, our gang enforcement division units, Z cars, X cars, and vice units throughout the city to focus on very strategic missions where we have seen robberies being more concentrated. And that's again in areas of great heavy pedestrian traffic, parking lots, sidewalk areas, around dining establishments as well. Third, very importantly, diligent and timely daily mission review at the geographic area level. There's a uniqueness to every one of our 21 areas, but we must ensure that commanding officers, lieutenants, patrol watch commanders, detective commanding officers are reviewing what happens not only within a 24-hour period, but from watch to watch to watch, because there's sometimes a certain nimbleness that is needed for us to understand what happened 8-10 hours prior, and what are we looking for if we have the same group of individuals that are targeting members of our community. Fourthly, looking at the citywide communication and coordination of robbery trends and patterns. Again, my thanks to Captain Jeff Bratcher of CompStat, Lieutenant Chris Chase, and Jessica Stantlin, who provide us real-time information and what we call halftime reports to all of the geographic areas so that we're not behind trends and patterns. We're trying to get ahead of them as well. My thanks also to Deputy Chief Chris Pitcher, and particularly to Captain John Tippett of Robbery Homicide Division that is leading a robbery task force operation in support of the 21 geographic areas, looking at and picking up cases that we have seen, everything from smash and grab to the follow home cases, making great strides in not only apprehension, but getting filings against these predatory groups. So again, to Captain Tippett and to both Chris Pitcher and Ernie Eskridge, my thanks there as well. Sixth, strong forensics. By deploying and ensuring that we have night detectives in the 21 geographic areas, since we're looking predominantly at PM2, AM1 robbery pictures, so during the hours of darkness, the importance of having a trained investigator out there to respond with our first responders to identify not only video evidence, but anything from which we can collect DNA is critical. And we have strong deployment of our night detectives as well. Seventh, I'd like to thank all of our members of the media, radio, print, those on social media, television, because they provide some great information, also provide information on persons of interest. So we thank them and want to acknowledge their partnership in helping to harden those targets. And lastly, and very importantly, and this is a very direct emphasis by Chief Moore, is where are the guns coming from? Where is the trafficking coming from? How are guns getting so freely, it appears, in the hands of these predators, not only in robberies, but as we talk about shooting violence citywide? Again, Gang and Narcotics Division, geographic area detectives working hand in hand together to try to trace back to either residential burglaries where firearms have not been secured, some of the thefts we saw on the Union Pacific Rail line, working with our allied agency partners, with the alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosive experts in those areas. But again, all of the municipalities that make up the Los Angeles City and County regions are very important in exchanging information on what they're seeing as well. So I just wanted to share that deeper dive into the robbery picture. Moving on very briefly, we haven't heard much about our traffic collision situation in some of the past briefings to the commission and to the public. So I'd like to just take that for a moment as we see greater mobility challenges after the dissipation a bit of COVID. So year to date, unfortunately, we're seeing a 17% increase in fatal traffic collisions citywide. That's 62 this year to date versus 53 last year. Sadly, but not surprisingly, motor vehicle versus pedestrian, what we call K injuries, those are where somebody has passed away, have seen the largest increase. 33 versus 21 in 2021, which is a 57.1% increase. When we look at DUI traffics as well, we are flat in numbers from last year. But again, increased vigilance, and my thanks to especially our motor officers out there who continue to stay focused on DUI task force operations as well. So now I'd like to move along to our department personnel strength and looking forward to this next quarter that we will be entering. So our sworn numbers, we're still down 266 from our sworn authorities. So we're at 9,440. The civilian ranks also, we are down 156 from what we are authorized to hire, with our civilian force at 2,686. Currently in our academies, 231 recruits, and that takes us to a graduating class in July of 2022, actually July 29th with those numbers. As we look to those totals, we are hoping to see increased hiring, and we just had a briefing this morning on deployment in our public safety classifications for civilian employees, and that covers security forces, our custody services division, and also our PSRs. And that will conclude my chief's report for you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Grimala. Are there any questions for Chief Grimala? Commissioner Soboroff, I see your mic is open.
I don't. I just want to, again, want to thank you. And one of the memories that I have the most is when you decided not to run for chief last time. It changed the entire dynamic of the search. And that you're always going to be a chief to us. And I want to thank you for everything that you've done.
Thank you, Mr. Soboroff, very much. I thank you for your leadership over the years and your support as well. It has meant very much to me.
Thank you, Commissioner Soboroff. Commissioner Bonner, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, just briefly, thank you. Chief Grimala, I will call you later to thank you properly for your 37 years of service, and in particular, the example that you've set and the legacy that you're leaving for both men and women in the department. So we'll look forward to closing out some of those that conversation with you a little bit later. I did have one tough question for you, though, or what I perceive as a tough question relating to some of the crime statistics. And you mentioned the intimate partner violence, which is an area which I understand and believe to be probably the largest segment of unreported crimes, and not just in Los Angeles, but probably around the country, and largely because most of those crimes occur in the home between people who are known to one another. So it's people beating up their family members and that kind of thing. And so the question, you mentioned some of the work on social media and the like relative to heightening awareness and some of the conversation around robbery. The question is, one is what I said, is it reasonably accurate, the idea that there's a large number of aggravated assaults occurring in the city every day that just go simply unreported, as I mentioned. But if there's any truth to that, also, who works on that issue? You mentioned you expressed some appreciation for some of the nonprofit groups that I presume may be working on that. But and I'm not suggesting that I'm asking because I'm not really sure what role, if any, the department can play other than being reactive and responding when those incidents are reported. But can you comment on that briefly, just given at least the level of concern that I seem to think is warranted?
Yes, thank you so much, Commissioner Bonner. I think you summed it up wonderfully. I think what we are most grateful for in this department, besides clearly the recognition for the advocacy groups and their great leadership there as well, is the mayor and the First Lady putting great attention on our DART teams and the funding of those DART teams. That is the domestic violence response team that has a member of the advocacy world that is contracted with the city of Los Angeles, going out with an officer to be the first responders to domestic violence calls. And why is this so important? Once we, in this blue suit, take a report, interview victims, that's only the beginning of a very, very difficult journey for that domestic violence victim. It may not be the first time they've been victimized. It may be years of violence, the great courage, and I have to emphasize that. My heart goes out with respect for the courage of domestic violence victims who finally take that step, pick up the phone and report, because it is very, very difficult. Many times the other partner is the sole breadwinner. Many times there are young children. It is very difficult to uproot. So when police officers or detectives leave the scene of a domestic violence call, what happens next? Who is there to support through those next hours, days, weeks, and months in our criminal justice system that victim? And it is that advocate that drives up to that location once we have what we call a code 4, which is suspect is in custody, suspect is gone, the situation is somewhat static, to let that person know that we, as a city family, as Mayor Garcetti always says, we're supposed to lead with love. Where does that go for this victim that now wonders what is next. The fear, their heart racing, they're concerned for their children, they're concerned for their own safety. So I just have to say, the DART teams have been the most important piece of that world of support for our domestic violence victims, helping to get temporary restraining orders, emergency protective orders, a safe place where they can stay, trying to find maybe a different school for their child to attend if they are uprooted from their home, financial support, ways in which they could reach out to victims assistance. So I think that's very important, but we can't emphasize enough the importance that not just 1 month out of the year when we look at domestic violence awareness, it has to be something that's on our radar throughout the years, because men and women both, although it's largely, we see the female population that is the victim of domestic violence, but also our continued training internally for the handling of domestic violence calls properly for members of the LGBTQ community as well. Thank you.
Appreciate, and just one very quick follow-up on that issue. What are the kids fit into that with regard to child abuse or kids who are in those situations? Is that left to the LAUSD and their whatever law enforcement capacity that they have, or is it also picked up as part of the DART team effort that you mentioned?
Thank you for that, Mr. Bonner. Very, very important, because while there may not be physical scars, there are psychological scars. Hearing arguments day in, day out, children often hiding under a pile of clothes under a bed when officers respond because they're terrified. They don't want anyone to get hurt. They feel pulled apart. Mom, dad, where does their mind race and where does it go? Oftentimes we also see this as something that LAUSD will bring to the department's attention as a mandated reporter, but also the DART team can provide and does provide counseling services as well for those children. And Commissioner Bonner, I know throughout the time that we've known each other, you often have us focus on concerns of trauma-informed care, just as we do with shooting victims, like Laura Drino does with victims of violence that affect children within South Bureau, Central Bureau, and beyond. We have that as well here. And it's very important to remember that those are scars that can last a lifetime if not properly addressed.
And didn't you just lastly also yesterday evening I saw a report and I don't think you mentioned this in your review, but wasn't it didn't the LAPD respond to this incident where they were chasing someone in a foot pursuit and he had a infant son wrapped in his clothing?
Yes. Again, when children are brought into this world of violence or the tendency to escalate an incident, clearly the children are not only the most innocent, but oftentimes the most impacted.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner. Commissioner Kalante, did you have any comments or questions?
Yes, briefly. Again, like everyone here, Chief Gramala, it's been wonderful to work with you. I've known you a very short time, and I thank you for being open to thinking outside the box and as we think about like the future of our senior leads. And I just want to underscore for you to really think about like how amazing and what a great role model you have been for other women in the department. I've talked to other female officers and they really look up to you. So I just want you to take that in and to really acknowledge what a trailblazer you have been. And I too will check in with you before you leave. I did have a follow-up question to what Commissioner Bonner was discussing, which was the domestic violence. I know because I work with young people that dating violence is up across the country. And I think the Office of Juvenile, the Federal Office of Juvenile Justice has been really focused on dating violence between teens. I don't know that the department, what the department does, but I think that's an opportunity to kind of think about how we reach out, how we talk about dating violence between teenagers. I think it's a whole different kind of realm of safety, thinking about safety, but it's just something that I just wanted to highlight because I know those numbers are up and it's a harder population to reach. And obviously it takes a parent to, want to kind of move forward with even taking, reports, and then there's that whole dynamic in the family. But just something I just wanted to bring up, that those numbers are also increasing when it comes to domestic or dating violence.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And often that's where we see the cycle of violence begin that takes them into adulthood. But oftentimes there may be peer pressure, et cetera, that prevents the reporting of it. And I think the sooner and earlier that we socialize people to healthy relationships and what that looks like and what that means in partnership with our non-governmental organizations, our nonprofits, and with our schools, with our starting in high school and at the community college level and universities. That's something definitely that the department should explore in the future.
Right. And even thinking about how officers respond to possible allegations or radio calls when a parent or a young person might want to file a report. I think those are all nuances in how we respond. So just something to think about. But thank you again. I look forward to connecting with you before you retire.
Thank you as well, Commissioner. Appreciate and respect you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kalante. Commissioner Decker, did you have any questions for Chief Grimala? Thank you very much, Chief Grimala. Then at this time, Madam Secretary, we're going to go to item 2 on the agenda, public comment period. Can you please bring up the first caller?
Okay, our first speaker is Betty Lay, followed by Jason R.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
I'd like to speak on the chief's report, a couple items on the agenda and public comment, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, first off, words cannot express the gratitude and respect for Assistant Chief Grimala, and congratulations on your retirement. And really appreciate your report. For agenda items, I'm supporting 3A, B, C, and D. And I want everyone to know again that I do not work for LAPD. I do not receive a check from anybody. I do support everyone within the department. I want everyone to stay safe and healthy. And I'm still arguing over this Bluestone because it's not fair. Nobody should lose their jobs over their health condition and their respect to what they want to put in their body or not. I thank you for your time. Again, Grimala, I will touch base with you via email. Congratulations again. I yield the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Jason R, followed by Matios Kade.
Becky, all of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
So we didn't need a new OIG report to know that the system of quote unquote discipline for LAPD pigs is crooked as hell. We know that the LAPD does its best to make sure its officers receive no type of discipline when they murder or attempt to murder our people. What this report supports is that having cops in our community is a public safety risk. We are less safe with cops in our communities. We are less safe when we invest in the failed experiment of the LAPD, and we are less safe as a result of there being no type of accountability for these murderers. 3 out of 4 shots fired during that time period were ruled out of policy by the police commission, but only 1 officer was fired, and that was for the murder of Kenneth French. This only happened because of how much national attention it got. In addition, it resulted in a $17 million settlement from the city. Y'all keep protecting these killers and padding their pockets while costing the city more and more money each year. Your next report should look at how many officers get to retire before facing any type of discipline or face the consequences for their action. How much money do they get to steal from our people as they keep those funded pensions and benefits? You got top cops like Moore who say that this is out of hand, it's out of his hands, and stricter penalties and punishments should be in place. But we know that Moore and Grimala and Choi fully support the system that's in place. It allows them to skirt any type of responsibility, just like Moore did when he said he was ultimately responsible for the 27th San Pedro bombing. But he, just like the bomb techs, still have a job and are still getting paid. No discipline, no reprimand, no justice. And we know that these all civilian panels are used as a guise aimed at convincing the public that they are part of the process, but nothing could be further from the truth. The people who make up these disciplinary boards are made up of your most fervent bootlicking citizens. All you have to do is listen to the pro-police callers that call in each and every week that y'all prioritize to figure out who is appointed to these boards. This idea that members of the public should have a role in overseeing police is used by this department and its supporters to sanction its violence. Now, lastly, Will Good over at Film the Police LA posted about a letter he received in regards to the January 12th display of a sign that read, "Due to the defunding, we are currently short-staffed for the day and our desk will be closed." So while the allegation against the employee was sustained, the allegation that Will made was classified as unfounded. Monotone Moore and the LAPD are so petty that they don't want to give Will any type of credibility because he exposes this department on the regular for its racism, hypocrisy, and harm. Now, Magic Mike claimed that the allegation that employees were responsible for posting the sign, which they knew or should have known contained false information, was unfounded. But again, how was the LAPD defunded? The $150 million that your supporters, including Conman Caruso, keep alluding to came from an increase in the budget that year, and LAPD still made up at least a third of that money working overtime. It was confirmed yesterday that the city spent half of the $640 million that the American Rescue Plan funded on your officer salaries during a pandemic. We know that you got a 3% increase last year. Just want to say, fuck every single one of y'all.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Montrose Cadane, followed by Zach Sherwin.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
So deputy chiefs like Grimala really function for one purpose when they're upfront like this, and that's to push an LAPD narrative that's contrary to the truth. And, you know, a lot of that narrative is kind of what we see with the OIG report, that the violence that the LAPD enacts can somehow be managed and assessed and checked in some way. And we know that's not the case. And then the other aspect that they kind of push is this notion that the LAPD is somewhat infallible in addressing crime at large. A lot of the conversation today was about domestic violence and the harm that is enacted upon children as a result of that. And recently we've seen pretty overt acts of physical violence, murder, even death by the LAPD enacted upon children. The murder of Valentina Oriana Peralta comes to mind. And recently there's been footage of an LAPD officer fracturing the skull of a baby. But there are also cases of sexual violence that are well documented, spanning decades by the LAPD. And you can find this in our at Stop LAPD Spying Coalition's timeline of child abuse by the LAPD. And I'm going to spend the rest of this comment just reading from that. So in 2003, a lawsuit is brought by a former Explorer Scout charging that Deputy Chief David Kalish began sexually abusing him when he was 14 years old and continued from 1974 to 1979. A 5-month investigation of Kalish reveals similar accounts of sexual abuse from an additional 5 youth. In 2005, Officer George Stan, an LAPD veteran, ran a San Fernando Valley Explorer program for a year. He's arrested for multiple charges of sex acts and sending harmful materials to an Explorer applicant. Stan's acquaintance with the applicant began when the boy was 12 years old. The resulting investigation found that Stan molested 7 minors, 2 of whom were involved in the Explorer program. Stan retired from the LAPD following his arrest and was sentenced to 11 years, 4 months in jail. In 2005, again, Officer Jerry Sandwell is arrested for the forcible rape of a 17-year-old girl. In 2005, off-duty officer Ralph Cameron Lakin is arrested for covertly taking sexually suggestive pictures of girls as young as 4 years old. In 2005, Officer Hector Vialta is arrested for forcibly raping a woman in his home while he's off duty. It's not clear if he was ever charged. In 2008, a video of the LAPD's Juvenile Impact Program is made public. The JIP is described as an intervention boot camp style program for at-risk youth. While originally for youth aged 12 to 17, over time the age limit dropped to 9 to 15 years old so they could, quote unquote, intervene at an earlier age. In the video, no longer available on YouTube, children as young as 9 are made to roll through mud as an officer shouts at them and sprays them with a hose. I call that abusive behavior.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Zach Sherwin, followed by Philip Tabby.
All items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
It is wild to watch these meetings week after week, and to see the extent to which all of you stay quiet. And then to watch you today take the kind of turns that you took, like stepping up with smiles on your faces and suddenly some animation, so that you can gush about Chief Grimala's impending retirement. And so it really dispels the misconception one might come away with that you're incapable of speaking. And it really underlines the extent to which you maintain like a stoic, stony, silent demeanor about the actual business of this commission. But you all happily dogpile on and, scramble over each other to queue up to be the next in line to do the easy thing of congratulating someone for their decades of service. I really wish that you showed that same kind of eagerness to speak to the things that are actually on the mind of this community. And the contrast is really striking. Item 4A on today's agenda makes it crystal clear, if it wasn't already, and it was a long time ago, but forcing the public to speak as item 2 on the agenda before you, the commission, hears each agenda item. It's so ridiculous. Look, none of us harbors any illusions, commissioners, that you're going to start demanding that the cops start holding killer cops accountable. And the statistics in that report, my God. But still, we need to have the chance to hear you all show your asses and again scramble all over yourselves to defend things, so that they can keep going the way that they've been going in this department. We need to watch you do that, commissioners, and we need to hear whatever else is going to be said about that report today, and then we need to have the opportunity to comment on it. Doing it this way is the opposite of your stated mission of being the citizen's voice in police affairs. It is impossible to fathom how you can continue doing this this deep into the pandemic with your hiding behind your designation of these are special meetings of the police commission. It's frankly, I was gonna say it's sickening, and it is, but it's also just hilarious. You are so flagrantly a sham. And I think each of you should be ashamed. So, give us the opportunity to call out your cowardice in real time. Chief Grimala, just to balance it out a little bit, I think you gave your life and career to an organization with a history of racism and violence that very much goes on to this day with no accountability for killer cops. You literally called cops the troops, which really jumped out to the ear of this listener who's concerned about the increasing militarization of this police department. Shame on you all, this is a joke. I yield the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Philip Tabby, followed by Steve Rogers.
Yes, all items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Grimala, for your amazing service. 37 years, ma'am. That's commendable. I wish you well on your retirement and enjoy it. Okay, popcorn time. The entire COVID situation has destroyed infrastructure, destroyed jobs, and has caused segregation and discrimination worldwide. Yet the city of Los Angeles still wants to damage our public safety, disciplining officers and terminating them because they refuse to get an experimental shot is wrong, immoral, and illegal. Every single officer who has been dealt a devastating blow by this commission over the COVID situation deserves amnesty. We are down to what, 9,400 or so officers, and you still want to play politics? Just like what's happening with the teachers union here on muzzling our children. Such a disgrace. You see those parents out there, they're protesting. I wish them well. I hope they unmuzzle our children. But even Sheriff Villanueva pointed out that surrounding counties do not have these draconian measures. New York, a much more densely populated area, has even reversed course. Not only do our officers deserve amnesty, all city and county employees deserve the same. Let's also not ignore the elephant in the room. Whilst this is all going on, Bluestone acquired a no-bid contract to test certain officers at a very high price, where the officer is required to pay. And on top of that all, Chief Moore is calling for 100% compliance. With corruption unfolding all around the world at a high rate, I would not ignore what is going on here. Speaking of corruption, let's not forget about soft on crime Monica Rodriguez having an influence over moving a great senior lead officer because she had some issue with him. Cesar Contreras is a well-liked throughout all communities. There was zero disciplining issues, and not once did Deputy Chief Hamilton or Chief Moore seek the advice of the CPAB on this move. Quite frankly, CPAB and community members' concerns have gone ignored when it comes to higher command staff. Telling us it's a personnel issue is a slap in the face. Shame on you. Our community demands Cesar Contreras be put back into his original area immediately. Politics and public safety should never mix. I called for an internal affairs investigation into this matter, and that sentiment still stands. Crime is still rising, and with the gas prices.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Steve Rogers, followed by Q Jean-Marie.
Top of the morning to you.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
The report of the Chief of Police, item B, and public comment.
Okay, 3 minutes.
The United States of America is a constitutional republic. We are all children of God and all lives matter. And I want to congratulate Chief Gamala on her retirement. Thank her for her service. The words that come to mind that I've heard officers use regarding her, courage, great capability, communication skills, and compassion. So thank you, Chief Gamala. I think that, speaking of compassion, I want to respond to the portion of the report from the chief about the COVID-19 report. Chief reported that there were 5 new cases. She didn't mention how many of those people were vaccinated. Last week, Chief Choi mentioned that 7 out of 8 were vaccinated. I bring this up because, speaking of discipline, we have officers who've been terminated, 2 retired, as it was reported. I don't know if that was under duress because of the present situation, and 8 were assigned to home. We need all the officers we can get. Crime is up dramatically over a period of a couple of years, and it's continuing to go up. I think that the fact that 7 out of 8 of the new cases, as reported by Chief Choi, were vaccinated tells you the vaccination, so-called vaccination, is illogical, immoral, and illegal. I read into the record last year the law, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII, HIPAA, California Health and Safety Code. And so you can't say you don't know. And as the chief said, the COVID situation is dissipating. It's dissipating. So it's time to start thinking about an amnesty for those who decided on their own, maybe for religious reasons, for medical reasons, that they should not be terminated or disciplined. There should be an amnesty on this. Follow the money and go where the evidence takes you. And Bluestone has obviously got a no-bid contract. There should be an investigation into that. And why are the officers paying out of their own pocket while it's available for free if you want to get tested? But it's time for this nonsense to end. We have to respect and protect the individual. Now, I only get 3 minutes here. So let me just refer you to the healthyamerican.org if you need more information on that situation of the COVID-19, and mfany.org. That's Medical Freedom Alliance, New York.org. This is Irish Heritage Month. St. Patrick's Day is coming up. St. Joseph's Day 2 days after that. I just want to acknowledge that because no one else did.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Q Jean Marie, followed by Richie.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
So in a city where law enforcement already receives 50% of our unrestricted budget, almost, we found out that the city received $600 million roughly from the American Rescue Plan, and roughly half of it, 317 million, went to law enforcement. How is this justifiable? How much of that money went to keeping people in their homes or to build well-needed housing and to address other resources needed in our city? People are being evicted right now because the city kept passing moratoriums instead of doing rent relief for people who needed to stay in their homes. And now the problem persists, right? And is the police associations will never say, well, we need more housing, because when an officer makes over north of $70,000 a year, along with all the other perks that they receive, why would they ever care about anything else but their constituency? And then it's like having a city. There are cities in America that depend strictly on prison labor, right? Strictly on the prison economy in that city. So why would they want a decrease in crime? It's kind of like a conflict of interest to say, you know, your economy depends on a prison and then you want a decrease in crime. That doesn't make sense. Concerning crime, we know that certain crimes are up, but all the crimes that are up are related to poverty. They're related to COVID-19, right? Even the numbers are going down from last year, because again, some of those numbers have increased because now people are not sheltering in place. Now they're out. They're actually responding to the things that were caused by COVID-19. So when people come, and they did this during the 1994 when Biden signed the crime bill, right, that incarcerated Black and brown folks and created more crime. I think that's what the issue is. I think that we've created a society of prisoners, and so when people get out of jail, they have no resources because we criminalized folks that shouldn't have been criminalized to begin with, and that increased crime. And so what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And then we have people here are angry because officers are being disciplined for COVID-19. Obviously, it's political because they can't leave COVID-19 alone, even though cases are going down, and they want officers to. It seems like they have been basically placed there, or the LAPD is asking folks to call in because they're actually dealing with issues related to officers themselves and not to the public. I yield my time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Richie, followed by Baba Akili.
Yes, all available items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Commissioner Bonner just got up and walked away. So this commission always proving that you all truly care about hearing from the people. Bonner, nice to see you back. And so, you know, Briggs, you always talk about people living in reality and things like that. You spent all this time talking about Chief Grimala at the beginning. Briggs, did you watch the body cam footage of the LAPD officer tackling the man with the baby and dragging the baby out of his hands? Briggs, I know you're looking down at the moment, but did you watch the video? I did, and I really wish I didn't. It was pretty horrifying. And so, Briggs, are you living in the reality where we're watching the same videos? And you sign off on this, bro. You sign off. You said yes to them getting a 12% increase after LAPD killings went up 160%. They blew up a neighborhood, killed 2 people, Ozzie Hutchins and Ramon Reyes. They shot 14-year-old Valentina and Daniel Lopez. And you voted to give them a 12% budget increase, Briggs. And so you take all these shots at people calling in, but you buck the same line as LAPD. This is a fraudulent oversight body. And if you all think you're providing some sort of oversight, you're not living in fucking reality, okay? You guys are living in fucking fairy tale land, honestly. You guys sign off on this fucking violence perpetuated by LAPD every single day. Did you watch that fucking video? Chief Grimala, did you watch the body cam footage of your officers tackling a man with a 10-month-old baby in his arms, fracturing his skull and dragging the baby out of his arms? Did you watch the body cam footage? It was horrifying, and I wish I had not done it. Everything LAPD does is horrifying. Black and brown communities have PTSD and trauma from the violence perpetuated by LAPD over decades and generations of violence and abuse and harassment. The report came out about the oversight body gives these rulings, and LAPD fucking officers aren't even held accountable ever. Chief Moore just doesn't do shit. They got 50% of the American Rescue Plan. Chief Grimala, happy retirement, and fuck you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Baba Keeley, followed by Gina Viola.
Police report and item, I think it's 4A, the Inspector General's report.
Okay, 3 minutes.
All right, I won't take 3 minutes. First, let me just say that I think one of the caller Zach points is an indication of why this 45 minutes is such a travesty, because we haven't heard the police, we haven't heard this Inspector General's report. We know what's in it, but we haven't had a chance to hear it. And so we won't have a real chance to comment on it. And so this 45 minutes is an example of why and how you all are really ducking responsibility. And just you provide some time for the public to comment and then move on. It's a cowardice approach. And I'm looking forward to the day when we are in the same room together so I can make my voice heard directly and loudly at you all. This most recent report that's about to come out, that you all are about to share, underscores your inability or unwillingness to hold police accountable. And that's why there is no trust. That's why there is no respect, because we know and we have known that you all are unwilling and incapable of holding the police accountable. The report reinforces the perception that the police are untouchable and infallible, which underscores why nobody wants to have relationships with or supports. The cases should be independently investigated. We should have the Attorney General's office in here looking at those cases. The police are the only employees I know that have an extra set of rights. So even when they are found out of policy, even when they are found wrong, even when they are found to be responsible, then they have these extra set of rights that gets them out of it. That has to stop at some point. You all, well, I don't have any expectations that you all will do anything other than rubber stamp what the police recommend to you, because you're there to protect the institution. But this report underscores why your protection of the institution renders you all ineffective and I think incapable. We are demanding accountability and justice for the families. And at this point, the 5 of you are not the people to be doing that. So that's why we have supported defunding the police, and that's why we have called for the firing of Chief Moore. I'm going to yield the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Gina Viola, followed by caller ending 3146.
Hi, Chief's report and public comment, please.
Okay, 2 minutes.
So for years now, we have been railing against this body. You claim to be accountability and you are anything but. The OIG's report that you're going to listen to long after we have an opportunity to comment on it is going to tell you what we already know, which is of the 66 out of policy shots fired that this useless body found, only one person has been fired as a result of that. The atrocious killing of a man in a Costco by an off-duty officer. I'm just, thank goodness that one was fired, but what about everybody else? What about these 65 other incidents that this body managed to find out of policy that absolutely nothing has been done about? You claim to be the citizen's voice in policing affairs. How can that be? How can that be when you go out of your way to great lengths to limit our ability to meaningfully participate in this process? You do that by having these meetings on Tuesday mornings at 9:30, when you know City Council meets, when you know Board of Supervisor meets, when you know the LAUSD body, board meets. You do that so that people cannot meaningfully participate. You're still meeting virtually, yet kids have been back in school for ages. In fact, now everybody's pushing for them to take the masks off, and you still can't go back into the room. You know why you can't go back into that room. Because you're afraid of the people. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of how we build power in that room together when we sit side by side with family members who've been killed by police, and we forge those bonds and we build that power. Well, guess what? That time is coming back. The people are going to bond together, and we are going to defund the police. We are going to see an end to the LAPD tyranny in Los Angeles.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have caller 3146, followed by T.
Hello.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
Chief report, closed session, and anything else.
Okay, 3 minutes.
I have to make a correction for the closed session of what I said last time. It wasn't Miller. His name was Rodriguez, and he had a fake gun, and he was shot dead in a back alley. And I think that this is one of the things that, again, needs more scrutiny, along with the knives, shooting the people with the knives, especially at distance. So I am thankful that there was no categorical use of force, but that's only, again, because the suspect didn't push the LAPD over the line of why they pulled the gun, which is still a good thing. They didn't kill anybody. I think but that's the goal, right? Okay. Moving on. If it's true, willy-nilly has a family member in law enforcement, I think that's corrupt. It's a conflict of, and if it's true, I don't know if it's true. I looked, I couldn't find anything. If that's not true, then scratch that. The CPAB, Bill Cotter, Bonner had asked him a question. All of a sudden he says, yeah, we all get together and we talk between the CPABs. That needs a cam. The president needs a cam. Everybody needs more cams. So you people say you're constitutional, it's LAPD commission, everything, but what's written on paper is not what happens in reality. Like, oh, doggone it, we actually knew what we were supposed to do, but we didn't do that. And then boom, the bomb went off. Let's look at Special Order 40, another one I don't like. A lot of us feel that this led to the death of Jamil Shaw Jr., right? I've also noticed that it killed Juan Jose Diaz, LAPD, and Fernando Arroyo's LAPD. This is Calanche's attitude of no ICE. This is their land, and we don't have to follow what anybody did because it's all white. And there's a lot to that. I agree. There's a lot of white problem in it. But your position is unconstitutional. It's the same as the mayor's. Let's look at what happened in Dogtown, the 100-year anniversary of Dogtown shooting up Irish people and Italians. A lot of these crimes were never solved. And this is how in the black area of what was called South Central was black. Now it's Central LA. It's mostly Mexican. And they come in this brown beret Reconquista concept. It's a killer. And your own department is being told what to do by the culprit, the federal government. has the LAPD doing things that doesn't even line up with what's written down on the Constitution. I mean, it looks good what's written down if that was what was being done. That's not what's happening, though. What's written on paper doesn't happen. This is one of the main problems. I don't know how to fix it. What you people are doing to my family service is criminal.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have T followed by Hamid Khan.
Can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Power and restraint to all the families impacted by police violence, and still no one's been held accountable. In the recent weeks, the Office of Inspector General has reported on the shootings and killings by LAPD cops over the last 6 years, as directed by Mayor Garcetti, following the murder of 18 people by LAPD in 2021. Garcetti has claimed the assessments would give a clear understanding of the fairness discipline system for the LAPD cops who fire their guns and are found to be out of policy, so they will know what reforms need to be made. These are the actions of a mayor who is anti-Black and who has always been complicit with LAPD murders. Further, Garcetti has steadily increased the LAPD budget over $520 million since he took office, while the number of folks who are unhoused increases, as well as the deaths related to the being unhoused and LAPD violence towards the unhoused community. LAPD murders also increased in 2021, and numerous killings by police of folks who are in crisis. The OIG report on discipline resulting from out-of-policy officers involved shootings confirms that even when cops use lethal violence in a way that is deemed to be out of policy, they might not actually face discipline significant consequences. From the beginning of 2015 to the end of 2021, nearly 41% of cops who use lethal violence in a way deemed out of policy were not given any discipline. And some cops, including Ryan Lee and Martin Robles, that murdered Grishari Mack in the crowded Baldwin Hills Crenshaw Mall as he was experiencing a mental health crisis, appealed the decision and had the out of policy change to not guilty. The system, it cannot be reformed. It needs to be abolished. It's been designed to maintain violence, patriarchal, racist systems, and the dominance of control while carrying out the lie of civilian oversight, as former head of LAPD Charlie Beck confirmed in a webinar in 2021. The chief controls out of all discipline, even though the police commission body may rule and have different opinion that the chief on deadly use of force, that the body may rule as a substandard in some way. The chief controls what the result is. Garcetti knows and relies upon the violence of the LAPD, and these assessments will not result in change of process or of police. We demand that LAPD is defunded and abolished. We demand permanent housing, access to mental health care services and healthcare facilities, and investment in schools and parks. And we want LAPD out of schools and communities.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Hamid Khan, followed by EP. Hamid, you're on. Okay, we'll go to the next caller, EP.
Yeah, hello, good morning. I'm gonna try and make my comment short and concise. Einstein said the definition of insanity is making the same mistake and expecting different results. I think that's the best way of essentially summing up policing and this board. It's essentially making the same mistakes for over 2 centuries, if not more, definitely more, and expecting different results. Now, either y'all are willfully ignorant or y'all are intentionally playing the role of being daft, but are completely aware that your policies of policing do not work. They have not worked historically. They will not work in the future. And the only way of addressing crime and addressing the problems that all of y'all have spoken of today and all these other board meetings throughout the course of time is to, again, address the root problem, address the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is if people are not treated with dignity and respect and aren't given a living wage and aren't afforded the same opportunities as other people, then they will continue committing crime. And that doesn't matter what their background is. That's happened in every part of the world. And so if you want to address the problem, if you want to address the root of the problem, you're not going to do so by throwing more money at the police who have a 2% effectiveness rate or crime solving rate. So they are bad at their jobs and they're not going to get good at their job just by throwing more money at them. As far as addressing sexual assault goes, I think that's a commendable thing to do, but the police are not the ones to do it. You have a 40% rate within your own force of domestic violence and domestic abuse. So how can we possibly expect y'all who can't even address the sexual assault and sexual abuse between families within your own ranks to address this problem outside of it, outside of the police force? So that's not going to happen. And, you know, a lot of callers keep calling in and talking about, you know, amnesty for the police. I think a lot of them seem to forget that we've had over 900,000 plus, approaching 1 million people that have lost their lives because of this recklessness that these people are promoting on these Zoom calls, right? More people are dying and more people have died because we haven't taken the virus seriously. And you have countries like New Zealand and Sweden that are coming out of the pandemic because they took the pandemic seriously. They took all the precautions seriously. They got vaccinated. They wore their mask. And that's why they're basically out as far as dealing with COVID. So, you know, follow the science, as you all like to say, and yeah, abolish the police, defund them, and start funding things that actually decrease crime, because we care about our community too. We want our communities safe.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll go to Nolan Hibbard. Nolan, you're on.
Hi. Yeah, I'd like to comment on all items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
So, yeah, thank you, Gramala, for resigning. I think like all LAPD officers should do that. I just hope that this board does its job, because this whole meeting has been really boring to listen to. Everyone asking you to do things, and also actually go through the meeting and then let us have public comment and respond to it, because this feels pretty useless. And yeah, it's disappointing after seeing that LAPD officer like slam that kid into the ground. I don't see why any of you would be staying at your jobs. I think it's right for Gramala to be resigning, but it seems like some changes should have been taken a long time ago, and that's on all of you. If you can't even hold yourselves accountable, I don't know how you could even imagine holding LAPD accountable, especially after all they've been paid. Yeah, I think it's just pretty disgusting, and trying to lift the vaccine and mask mandates would probably only kill more people. So all of you could just quit and save a lot of trouble. Yeah, I rest the rest of my time. Fuck you all.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go back to Hamid.
And Hamid Khan will be the last caller for the day, Madam Secretary.
Okay. Hamid Khan, you're on.
Mr. Khan, you're on. Can you hear us? Thank you, Madam Secretary. We'll return to the regular agenda items at this time. So at this time, we're going to go to item 3 on the agenda, the consent agenda items. Are there, do any of the commissioners want to discuss any of those items? Seeing none at this time, I move that we approve items 3A, B, C, and D. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. This time we'll go to item 4 on the regular agenda, the Inspector General's report on out of policy officer involved shootings from 2015 to 2020. Mr. Inspector General, I see you have Django Sibley with you today.
Yes, Commissioner. Good morning to everyone. Inspector General Mark Smith, and joining me today, as you mentioned, are both Assistant Inspector General Django Sibley and Police Special Investigator Lisa Redout, who worked on this project for us. To say briefly, as you may recall, earlier this year, this commission directed the Office of the Inspector General to gather together data from a 6-year period from the beginning of 2015 to the end of 2020 on officer-involved shooting incidents that had an out of policy finding for the shooting. Out of those incidents, we were asked to also look at how many of them involved subjects who had weapons other than firearms, any discipline that was imposed as a result of those incidents, and if any discipline was appealed, how many appeals occurred and what were the results of those appeals. Gathering this data caused us to look at a few different sources to get all this information collected together in a presentation form for you. We did our best to pull it together and put it into both an informative and comprehensive report to cover all those things that were requested of us. To tell you what we found when we gathered that data together, I'll turn it over to Mr. Sibley and Ms. Redout.
Good morning, Commissioners, Chief Kamala. This report covers, as the Inspector General mentioned, the period of time from the beginning of 2015 to the end of 2020, incidents that occurred during that time frame. We looked at all of the cases in which the Commission found that at least one shot fired by an officer during an officer-involved shooting incident was out of policy. And that was a total of 45 incidents which occurred during that time period. Those 45 incidents involved 66 employees who were found to have fired at least one shot, which was found to be out of policy by the Commission in its adjudication of those cases. So total of 66 employees. In terms of the weapons that the suspects or subjects involved in those incidents were reportedly armed with, well, we had a total of 54 subjects involved in the 45 incidents. 17 of those individuals were reported to have been armed with a firearm, 11 with an edged weapon, 7 with another type of weapon, and 19 were unarmed. In terms of the injuries that resulted from those officer-involved shootings, we had 22 individuals who were not hit by gunfire. We had 12 individuals who received non-fatal gunshot wounds, and we had 20 individuals who were fatally wounded by gunfire in those incidents. Additionally, there was one person who was a hostage who was also killed during one of those incidents. When the Board of Police Commissioners makes a determination that an officer has violated the department's use of force policy in connection with an officer-involved shooting or another categorical use of force, the responsibility of the Chief of Police is to determine the remedial action to be taken in connection with that out of policy finding. The Chief has 3 options to select from in determining the appropriate remedial action. One of those is extensive retraining. The second one is issuing a notice to correct deficiencies. And the third one is the initiation of a personnel complaint. All 66 officers who received out of policy findings during this time period were directed to extensive retraining. Additionally, 37 of those officers, or in the case of 37 of those officers, the Chief directed that a personnel complaint be initiated. And in one case, the chief directed that a notice to correct deficiencies be issued. In addition to the 37 officers who were subject to a personnel complaint.
What is the notice? What does that mean? In other words, I understand what the retraining means. The other two options, will you define what those are?
So extensive retraining is a non-disciplinary course of action, and it involves providing the employee with training related to the issues that are raised by an incident. A notice to correct deficiencies is a written notice to the employee to advise them that their conduct fell short of the department standards. So also non-disciplinary in nature, and then the personnel complaint initiates the disciplinary process in the event that those complaints should be sustained. So those are the three options that the chief has in terms of remedial action. So as I mentioned, in every case, the employee received extensive retraining. And for 37 of those cases, the chief directed that a personnel complaint be initiated. Additionally, for those 29 officers for whom the chief did not direct that a personnel complaint be initiated, members of the public filed personnel complaints against 22 of them. So in total, 59 officers were subject to the personnel complaint process, either as a result of a direction by the chief of police or from a member of the public initiating a personnel complaint. The result of those complaint investigations was that 39 officers received sustained findings for unauthorized force or a shooting violation. So specifically, that they were found through the personnel complaint process to have engaged in misconduct related to the firing of the shots. So 39 employees. So now I'm going to talk about what discipline was issued by the chief of police in connection with each of those 39. Now, the chief of police does not have the authority to simply terminate an officer in the event that he may feel that that's the appropriate penalty. Instead, the chief can direct the officer to a board of rights with the proposed penalty of termination. And that occurred in 9 cases, 9 of the 39. And the outcome of those 9 directions to a board of rights are as follows. One of those cases is still pending. 1 case resulted in termination. In 4 cases, the board found the employee guilty, but did not terminate the employee and instead imposed a period of suspension days. In 2 cases, the employee resigned before the board process had run its course. And in 1 case, the employee agreed to immediately retire and take a 22-day suspension. So that's the outcome of the 9 directed boards. Of the remaining 30 employees with sustained personnel complaint investigation findings, the chief of police issued discipline to all of them. And that discipline was as follows. 10 employees received official reprimands. 19 employees received a penalty of suspension days. And 1 employee was issued suspension days as well as a demotion. Now, once the chief of police has issued discipline, there are a couple of avenues through which the employee can appeal the discipline. And I'm going to briefly describe what those processes are and how they apply to the cases that we're looking at today. So one of those processes is the administrative appeal process. In the event that the employee has been issued discipline ranging from 1 to 22 suspension days, the employee can request an administrative appeal. To do so, they must waive their right to a board of rights hearing, admit guilt, and limit their appeal to the level of penalty imposed. The recommendation of the administrative appeal hearing officer, which may not be to increase the originally proposed level of discipline, is non-binding, which means that the chief may adopt or reject the hearing officer's recommendations. And we had 2 cases where officers appealed in this particular way using this part of the process. And in both cases, the hearing examiners recommended a reduction in discipline. And in both of those cases, it was reduced from suspension days to an official reprimand. Another manner in which the administrative appeal process applies here is in those cases where the employee is issued either a notice to correct deficiencies and or extensive retraining, i.e. non-disciplinary remedy to the out of policy conduct. In those cases, an employee can be found by the hearing officer to be guilty or not guilty of the out of policy conduct. And we had 18 employees who appealed their out of policy findings through this process. In each of those 18 cases, the hearing examiner recommended a not guilty finding when that finding was upheld by the chief of police. 12 of those 18 relate to a single case, which had multiple involved employees who received out of policy findings. We also identified 5 cases in which the employees appealed the chief's proposed penalty through an opted board of rights. This process differs from an administrative appeal in that the board of rights may find the employee guilty or not guilty and may recommend a penalty that is either lesser or greater than the originally imposed penalty from the chief of police. So, as I say, 5 cases through which employees appealed using the opted board of rights process. In one of those cases, the board recommended the same penalty that had been originally proposed by the chief of police. In 2 cases, the board reduced the penalty, found the employee guilty, but reduced the penalty that was originally imposed by the chief of police. And 2 of those opted board cases are still pending and have not yet reached a final result. So, commissioners, that is a brief summary of the numbers that are included in the report, and we're available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Sibley. Commissioner Soboroff, I see you had your hand.
This is process. This is due process. The way we do it. This is democracy. Does anybody else, have we looked at best practices? People can complain left and right about it. But do we feel this is the best practice? How have we looked at other departments, other places? We each have defined abilities here. Ours as commissioners is strictly one thing, and that is in policy or out of policy. Then the chief has his defined responsibilities, which have limits as well. And so does the Board of Rights, and so does the appeal process. And this whole thing combined is a process that yielded the results that you reported on. This was a report. It wasn't your opinion. It was a report. Have you looked at other processes or potential changes to this process that might yield different results?
Well, we did not evaluate, as you say, Commissioner, this is a report that simply describes the operation of the process and the outcomes of that process as it relates to the cases during that 6-year period. We didn't seek to evaluate the process itself, nor to compare it to the processes in other jurisdictions, and no doubt there's great variability if you were to make such a comparison, and we did not seek to do that in this case. So this is simply a factual description of the process that's used here in the city of Los Angeles and the results that those processes produced over that time period.
That's correct. And I think much more is being made of this as to whether the results are right or not right. This is just simply a report of the results based on the process. And the process, the law, the process has defined roles for all of us, including the chief. Correct.
Mr. Soborov,
Thank you.
while I don't have information on any contemporaneous review of other municipal agencies, I know that over time, the department has looked and continues to look and seek out best practices. However, what I can tell you is many other municipal agencies from other states have often come to seek the advice, look at the templates that Force Investigation Division does use for its investigative processes. And I think that this is important to publicly state as well. In
I agree.
addition, from the inception of an officer-involved shooting or a categorical use of force, we do not only have a representative from the Office of the Inspector General. Oftentimes, it's Assistant IG Mr. Sibley or one of his representatives who's clearly well versed in our policy, procedures, training, and processes, as well as a member of the District Attorney's Office that is there to oversee the quality, the content, and the integrity of the process that is happening out there in the field. And I think as
a chief or Inspector General's office. Can you also discuss something that isn't discussed in here? That is potential for criminal proceedings against an officer, what the district attorney's role is, what the state attorney general's role is?
Yes, Commissioner. So for all cases where somebody is struck by police gunfire, there is an automatic notification to the DA's office. And as Chief Gurmala mentioned, a representative of the district attorney will respond to the scene of that incident along with the Inspector General and all of the other entities that respond to those. Recently, as of last year, the Attorney General has also assumed a role in connection with fatal shootings of unarmed people. And in such cases, the investigation will be managed by the Attorney General's office, and the ultimate determination as to whether or not any prosecution will occur is going to be made by the Attorney General in those cases. Whereas in the other cases to which the district attorney responds and is responsible, it's the district attorney who will ultimately receive a criminal investigation of the incident and will make a determination as to whether or not to file criminal charges in those cases.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner Soborov. Commissioner Decker, I'm going to turn to you. Do you have any questions?
I do, thank you. I have a number of questions, Mr. Sibley, and I think these would go to you. So just for framing the issues, the report focuses on OISs, not all the categorical use of force cases heard by the commission, correct?
That's correct.
So I'd like to turn to some specific issues. First, the complaint process. You indicated that a chief, once the board determines something's out of policy, has 3 avenues to pursue: extends retraining, notice to correct, or personnel complaint. And in 37 of the 66 instances, the chief decided to file a complaint, but members of the public also then filed complaint in 22 additional matters. Are the matters treated, my first question on this is, are the matters treated the same whether the chief files a complaint or the public files a complaint in terms of the follow-up that is done internally?
We didn't look specifically at that question, Commissioner. What I can tell you, though, is that the chief of police will sustain typically complaints that are initiated by the complaints that are initiated as a result of the chief of police initiating the personal complaint process are overwhelmingly sustained That is less so the case with public initiated complaints.
But
And
in
that
the-
accounts for the difference in the numbers there.
Oh, no, I understand. But there were 3 instances where a complaint filed by a member of the public resulted in then discipline being imposed in those 3 additional cases, correct?
That's correct, Commissioner, yes.
Okay. Okay, I think I understand that. I'd like to, on the Board of Rights hearings, am I correct that the department is not represented by an attorney in those matters?
I believe that's correct, Commissioner, yes.
I see Commissioner Chief Grimala nodding as well.
That is correct.
And the individuals representing the department are trained advocates, but they're police officers, correct?
Yes, you may have some that have a legal education or a law degree, but they are not acting as an attorney.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Sibley, I'd like to turn to the administrative appeals because I spent some time looking at all the underlying documents, the city charter and everything to be sure I'm understanding all the different processes that occur. And the Board of Hearing Examiners, when there's a board of rights, there are 3 hearing examiners that are reflected there. Of course, it can be 2 officers and 1 civilian, but lately it appears there's 3 civilian hearing examiners. But in an administrative appeal, it's 1 hearing officer, not 3, correct?
Correct.
And my understanding also from the materials is that after an administrative hearing takes place, a recommendation is made to the chief, but the chief can reject that recommendation. Is that also correct?
Correct.
But in the 20 cases that you received, the chief has, whoever the chief was, always accepted that recommendation. Is that also right?
That's correct, Commissioner.
So I understand there were, of the 20 cases, there were 2 in which the proposed punishment was 5 days suspension and it got reduced to an official reprimand. And I understand what happened in, at least I think I understand what happened in those cases, but I'd like to turn to the other 18 where there was a finding by the Board of Police Commissioners of the shooting being out of policy. Discipline was imposed of extensive training, and that was appealed. And as I read these cases in your chart, all 18 of those cases were reduced to not guilty.
Correct.
And what I'm trying to understand is, what does not guilty mean? Now, does that mean that the decision of the Board of Police Commissioners that the case was out of policy was overturned? Or what precisely does not guilty mean?
Well, the way that it would appear in the record is that the officer's use of force would be out of policy, but that the action taken in connection with that was that the finding was appealed through an admin hearing and was found not guilty. So the commission's finding is still reflected in the record as having been the ultimate outcome of the adjudication, but the record would also reflect that subsequent to that, the action of the appeal was taken and that the outcome of that appeal was a not guilty finding.
And then the decision as to discipline would be based on the not guilty finding? Is that correct?
Well, there is no discipline in those cases. So that type of appeal is only available in cases where a non-disciplinary remedy is imposed by the chief of police.
Right. So there would be no extensive retraining in those cases.
The officers would in all likelihood have already received their extensive retraining. That's provided usually in short order after the adjudication. So I don't believe that it would, in practical terms, result in an officer not receiving training that they would otherwise have received. It's more, I think it's more to do with the record in their personnel file as to what the ultimate outcome of the case was.
And Commissioner, if I could, the extensive retraining, I think, is often and correctly seen as a remedial measure, but not necessarily a disciplinary one. So it's not that discipline was quote unquote overturned or vacated. That there wasn't discipline to begin with here. It was just a remedial measure, extensive retraining.
Yes, I understand that. Thank you. Because if there was to be discipline, the chief would have filed a personnel complaint. Correct. Okay. So effectively, what's being appealed is the commission's decision, though.
in effect.
So that it's on the record that there was a not guilty decision, even though the commission found that there was an out of policy use of force involved. Is that correct?
Yes.
And on what authority does that ability of one hearing examiner have to overturn a decision, effectively overturn a decision of the Board of Police Commissioners that has charter authority to make those decisions? Do you know?
It's simply a process that's defined by an MOU, Commissioner. I couldn't answer the question further than that.
An MOU, a memorandum of understanding
Correct.
between the department and
And the union.
And the union.
Yeah, the police protectively, that would be MOU 24 in most cases.
MOU 24. But in all of those cases, the chief of police has the authority to reject the recommendation. Is that also correct?
Yes,
And you found no case in which that was done.
that's correct.
All right, I have the answers to my questions that I was not able to clarify in advance. Commissioner Briggs, I would like, before we vote, I would like to make recommendations on further action the board can take if appropriate. Thank you, Commissioner Briggs.
Yes, Commissioner Decker, thank you. Commissioner Bonner, do you have any questions or comments?
Just still a couple of questions, still trying to, I think, get some understanding of some of the points that were just made. One, just a broad question, can you again clarify situations where either the Board of Rights, or I believe the administrative officer would address, on the one hand, discipline, only, versus this guilt or innocent, or guilty or not guilty?
Well, if an officer is either directed or opts for a Board of Rights, the board may find the officer guilty or not guilty. So that would apply in either circumstance. We did not have cases where the Boards of Rights found the officers to be not guilty. What we did see with the Boards of Rights was that in those cases where the chief proposed termination, there were a number of cases where the board reduced that penalty to some period of suspension days. And in those cases where the officers opted for a board, of the three where that process has been completed, one where they did not change the penalty proposed by the chief of police, and two where they reduced the penalty that was proposed by the chief of police.
In those cases where there was a Board of Rights involved, did you look also at the number of those that included an all-civilian board? My belief is that that the change permitting that process would have occurred probably midway during your review. If you were looking at 15 through 21, that was the 2019 change, I believe.
So,
but did you pick that up?
That wasn't specifically part of the report, but I do know that in one of the cases where the penalty was reduced from termination to suspension days, it was an all-civilian board in one of those cases. And that, in fact, was the only case that occurred during the period of time where that would have been an option.
Okay, so does that also mean then maybe you don't, there's not much to this other question of how many of those cases where there was a Board of Rights review, where do you capture also how many of those are unanimous versus some split?
I do not have that information. I'm afraid, Commissioner. Now.
Okay. And then going back to the question, I think a couple have asked already in terms of the Board of Police Commissioners, what is the option in terms of any further action that the board may take in this regard? I know in situations where obviously if the board is has disagreements with the chief's handling of discipline and so on, that can be raised in the context of personnel reviews and things of that nature. But in what we're talking about here, does the charter or the MOU 24, which I think I'd like to see probably like to see a copy of, but is there, what potential role, or options does the board have at this point? Many of the IG reports come with, specific recommendations as well. I don't believe that was necessarily asked for or not, but I'm just noting that we don't have that menu available to us as we often do, or I think usually do with an IG report. So any comment on that in that regard?
I mean, so you're correct, Commissioner. This isn't a report that has recommendations. It's not a report that sought to evaluate the processes. It's simply one that describes the way that those processes operated and the outcomes that they produced in these instances. As to the first part of your question about options, I'm not sure, just to make sure I'm understanding it, in terms of options that the Commission has, having made its adjudication on each case, I believe that's where the Commission's role ends in connection with that particular case. There is no appeal process or some equivalent of on behalf of the Commission to follow up on any subsequent proceedings that follow the Commission's adjudication. That is the final point in the process in which the Commission is involved in a decision-making role.
Right. No, I appreciate that. I think, again, what I'm really just, and I believe the limitation I'm describing is a function of the request that was made, I believe, in terms of the scope of what you produced here. But that's, I think, what I'm a little bit at a loss. We've got, and it appears that we asked for some information. We received some information, but it's not really clear to me what it is that we're supposed to do with it, or even potentially could do with it. So if there is any further insight on that, whether it's by the IG or any other commissioner, that's what I'll be interested in hearing. Thank you, Commissioner Briggs.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner. Commissioner Kalanche.
Yes, thank you. My questions were basically along the same lines as Commissioner Decker. I was really interested in the 18 appealed cases. So thank you for explaining that process. I too was concerned about the overturning of the commission out of policy findings. So just as a so I look forward to a future conversation and also looking at MOU 24. But an additional question is, who are the hearing officers that get to review these cases?
They are civilian individuals who are hired by the Commission.
Okay, so these are, okay. So I know that we can either, I know as we're starting to hire the hearing officers, they can be part of the 3-member Board of Rights. Am I correct? Or
Yes, they could participate in a Board of Rights, or they're also during the administrative appeals, they can operate individually.
Commissioner?
Yes.
There is just one pool of civilian hearing examiners that, as I'm sure you are familiar, is selected by this commission.
Right.
That pool feeds into both examiners for boards of rights when they are scheduled, as well as administrative appeals, which are heard by one hearing examiner. It's the same pool of hearing examiners.
Right, I understand that. Okay, so I did not, I understood that they were part of the Board of Rights group, but I did not know that they were lone hearing officers in administrative appeals. It's really important. Okay. Those are my questions. Actually, one more question. The Board of Rights, is that in the charter or is that another MOU? And sorry for not knowing this.
That the Board of Rights process is in the city charter.
City charter, okay. But the administrative appeal is part of the MOU.
That's correct.
Okay.
Commissioner, it's Article 10, Section 1070 of the LA City Charter, and that's entitled Disciplinary Procedures for the Police Department, if you need a quicker reference.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Briggs, yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Kalanche. Mr. Sibley, I just have a couple of follow-on questions. With respect to the, I believe you identified in your report that there were 45 officer involved shootings, correct?
Yes.
And of that 45 officer involved shootings, 20 of the suspects or subjects were fatally wounded. Is that correct?
Correct.
And in some instances, the chief of police recommended termination, correct?
That's correct. So in nine cases, the chief of police directed the officers to a board with the proposed penalty of termination.
And in at least 3 of the recommendations where the police recommended termination, the Board of Rights, for lack of a better word, overturned the police's recommendation and instead recommended and or imposed suspension. Is that correct?
That was in 4 cases, sir. And in those cases, the Board of Rights found the employee guilty, but issued a penalty less than termination. So, and it was a period of suspension days in each case.
And of those 4 instances, it's your information that only one of those Board of Right panels involved an all civilian panel?
That's correct, sir, yes.
Do you know the composition of the other panels?
They were traditionally composed with the sworn and the civilian, I believe, in the other 3 cases.
And Commissioner Briggs, only one of the cases was eligible for an all civilian panel. And that one was indeed an all civilian panel. The others were not eligible because it's not been implemented at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. When the chief asked for, I think the terminology is directed, meaning termination, and it goes before the Board of Rights panel, is evidence submitted to the that Board of Rights panel that differs from what is presented to the commission?
Commissioner, that Board of Rights panel is a de novo hearing with a presentation of evidence on the part of the department and the accused officer, as evidence is heard de novo.
So, Mr. Smith, for all of those who are present and or listening, can you explain what de novo means?
Yes, pardon me, I'm sorry. Without regard to prior investigations or presentations of evidence in any investigation or proceeding before the hearing. So the hearing is a new hearing with a new presentation of evidence that is then decided upon by the Board of Rights hearing examiners.
So, but my question is more specific. I'm parsing it. Is the Board of Rights presented with evidence that has not been presented to the Board of Police Commissioners?
Commissioner, in terms of the FID investigation, it would be the same FID investigation that was presented to the board when it adjudicated the case. So in that regard, the evidence is the same.
So it's an apple to apple comparison.
Yes, in that regard, with regard to the underlying investigation, it's the same investigation.
So
Commissioner Briggs?
Yes.
However, also please recall that in a Board of Rights proceeding, it is a quasi judicial or adversarial a process where there is defense and a prosecution, for lack of a better term. And so there may be arguments presented, there may be strategies presented, and that Board of Rights hearing that is not the same as what happened in a police commission deliberation. It's a different type of process in that way, that there is defense counsel in a prosecution case.
President Briggs, may I also add that there's the opportunity to hear testimony of witnesses, and those witnesses, to Inspector General Smith and Assistant Inspector General Sibley's point, they can be somewhat cross-examined during that process, and that at times is the opportunity to look at credibility of witnesses from both sides of the issue. And that's usually oftentimes when the chief will say, we want to see that interview process of specific witnesses take place. And that is the venue for that.
Thank you, Chief Grimala. So in that venue is the specific officer or officers who are involved in that shooting subject to this cross-examination? Is that a yes? I can't hear anyone.
Yes, they can choose not to testify.
Okay, similar to if they were in court. So, but the department, as I understand it, is not represented by an attorney, and the officer who is involved in the shooting is represented by an attorney, typically one that is provided to that officer by the PPL. Is that correct?
Correct.
That is often the case. I want to say it does go The internal aspects of that process does go a little bit outside what our report is today, but the officer does have the opportunity to retain counsel to represent him or her, as you stated, Commissioner Briggs.
But the department does not have that same opportunity. Is that correct?
The department is represented by its advocacy section, which is sworn members of the department.
But they're not attorneys.
I believe some of them may be or may have legal education or background. However, they are sworn department employees.
That is correct to Inspector General Smith's point. Some may have that background, and that may be why they apply for that particular position or are sought out for it. But it is not a mandatory requirement for an advocate to have a legal degree or legal education.
And the only, to Commissioner Decker's point, the only known legal basis for the Board of Rights to, in some instances, overturn the Board of Police Commissioners' determination of an out-of-policy shooting is this MOU 24?
No, the Board of Rights process is defined in the city charter, Commissioner.
I understand that, but are you aware of whether or not within the city charter, the Board of Rights is given the power or authority to overturn a Board of Police Commissioner determination as to whether or not a shooting is out of policy?
Yes, in as much as it can find the officer guilty or not guilty and determine the penalty in the event of a guilty finding. So that, yes, that comes from the city charter, that authority.
And Commissioner Briggs, if I could.
Sure,
clarify
Commissioner Decker.
something.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I just want to clarify. My questions were not about the 3-member Board of Rights process, which is defined in the charter. My questions, particularly on the 18, were about one hearing examiner making that recommendation to the chief of police and the chief of police then accepting it. That's the administrative process that I'm concerned about. That is not in the city charter, that's in the MOU, that effectively allows the chief of police to agree to overturn a decision of the Board of Police Commissioners. That's the more narrow issue that I was asking about.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sibley, I have no further questions. Commissioner Decker, I know that you had wanted to discuss something before we move to approve this report.
Thank you. I don't have any issues with approving and accepting the report. I would like to make some recommendations on further action the board can take, and perhaps colleagues, you have other recommendations as well. But first, I'd like to recommend that we direct the department to take the chart that was provided by the Inspector General and update it at least once a month and publish it on its website. And we similarly can publish it on ours. The IG took a lot of time to put this together. As he noted in the presentation, he had to pull it from different sources. And I think in the interest of transparency, we should make this report available on an ongoing basis and not wait for the next IG report. I would like to recommend that all Board of Rights decisions, as well as the decisions of hearing examiners, be made public unless prohibited by law. I'm aware that there are some laws that will prohibit decisions from being made public, but there's also some laws requiring it. Sometimes with simple redactions, they can be made public. Again, I think in the interest of transparency, just making those decisions public. Third, I'd like to suggest that we engage the city attorney's office, whether in written form or other communications, to request attorney representations in all boards of rights and hearing administrative matters. There may be reasons that they can't do it, but I think we need to engage in that. And fourth, I'd like to request, I think from the department, although they probably will want to consult with the city attorney's office, more information about this administrative process. And by the way, I'm not saying there shouldn't be an appeal process. I'm just concerned with the process where one hearing examiner presents a non-binding recommendation to a chief of police that has the effect of overturning a decision of the Board of Police Commissioners. I'm not talking about the Board of Rights process where the charter clearly spells it out, but narrowly defined to this administrative hearing process. I know I certainly would benefit from more information regarding that, its history, how it came about, and depending on what the city attorney says, its lawfulness given the charter authority of this commission. Those would be my 4 recommendations.
I would move that we adopt the recommendations proposed by Commissioner Decker. Is there a second?
Just a quick question. Commissioner Decker, can you just clarify quickly number 3, the with regard to the city attorney?
Engaging conversations, communications, whether we start with a letter or call them up to request that they offer representation, provide consistent representation in Board of Rights hearings and in these administrative hearings. They may have
To
looked
whom?
at previously.
That was the to whom. I'm sorry. Was the to whom representation to
The commission.
To the department.
I got
To
it.
the
Got it.
department.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Simple clarification. So I'm good. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. Apologies there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. City Attorney, you have your hand raised.
I do. If I can just make one recommendation so that it's not just left as a recommendation, perhaps to give direction to the executive director to act on behalf of the commission for those conversations and the initial engagement with my office.
Thank you for that clarification. And I would move that recommendation be a part of Commissioner Decker's recommendations. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. And at this time, I also,
Mr. President, I'm sorry.
I haven't finished.
Okay.
At this time, I would also move that we approve the Inspector General's report. And since this was something that was also requested by the mayor's office, that it be transmitted to the mayor's office. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Mr. Attorney, City Attorney General, Mr. City Attorney, did you have a comment at this point?
No, thank you. You got it.
Okay, thank you. At this time, there being no further regular agenda items, we will be moving into the closed session. Let's convene at 11:45.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss agenda items 5A1 and 5A2 in accordance with Government Code 54957.
I'll give Commissioner Sobroff an additional minute. Here he comes. Mr. Teefank, can you please read out the findings from the closed session?
Yes, Mr. President. Commission's concluded its work in closed session as relates to item 5A1, also involved shooting number 021-21. The board unanimously on a 5-0 vote adopted the recommendations of the chief of police, which were tactics, tactical debrief, 2 Sergeant 1, 1 Police Officer 3, 6 Police Officer 2s, administrative disapproval, 1 Police Officer 2. Drawing and exhibiting in policy, 1 Sergeant 1, 1 Police Officer 3, 6 Police Officer 2s. Lethal use of force in policy, 1 Police Officer 2. Out of policy, administrative disapproval, 1 Police Officer 2. As relates to item 5A2, Chief of Police directed use of force number 28-21. Commission unanimously adopted the recommendations of the Chief of Police on a 5-0 vote, which were relevant to tactics, administrative disapproval, 1 Police Officer 3 and 1 Police Officer 2. Non-lethal use of force in policy, 1 Police Officer 3 and 1 Police Officer 2. Lethal use of force out of policy, administrative disapproval, 1 Police Officer 3.
Is that it, Mr. Teefank?
Yes, sir. That concludes the report.
Thank you very much. At this time, there being no further business before the Board of Police Commissioner, I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone. See
Thank
you
you,
next
sir.
week. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.